The day my family walked into my office, they had no idea it was my office. That's the part one keep coming back to. 6 years of silence. 6 years of building, grinding, sacrificing, and becoming. And when they finally needed me, really needed me, they walked through the glass doors of Voss Development Group and told the receptionist they were there to see someone about a real estate matter. They didn't say they were there to see me. They didn't know I was the someone. My assistant, Priya, called my direct line at 10:47 on a Tuesday morning in October. "There's a family here," she said, her voice carrying that particular careful neutrality she used when something felt off. "A Mr. and Mrs. Calloway, and a woman named Vivienne Calloway. They say they have a meeting with legal about the Heron Parcel acquisition." I set down my coffee. The Heron Parcel. My grandmother's land. 4.2 acres on the eastern edge of what was now one of the most valuable corridors in the city, and for 6 years, worth approximately nothing to this family because they had never once thought to ask me what I planned to do with my half. "Send them to conference room B," I said. "Tell them legal will be with them shortly." I took exactly 4 minutes before I walked in. Not because I needed to compose myself. I had been composed for 6 years. I took 4 minutes because I wanted them to sit in that room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, the framed development renderings on the walls, the Voss Development Group logo embossed in brushed gold on the glass door, and I wanted them to wonder. My mother saw me first. The color left her face so completely that for a moment I thought she might faint. My father blinked 3 times in rapid succession, like a man trying to clear a hallucination. Vivienne, my older sister, sat between them in a pale yellow blazer that I recognized from 3 seasons ago. She looked expensive and slightly worn, the way things do when they're being stretched past their natural life. "Elena," my mother breathed. "Hello, Mom," I said, pulling out the chair at the head of the table and sitting down. I folded my hands in front of me. I didn't smile. I wasn't cruel, but I wasn't warm. I was simply present, the way a judge is present. "I understand you're here about the Heron Parcel." The silence in the room lasted a very long time. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. To understand why that silence meant everything, you have to go back 6 years. You have to go back to a dining room in a house I grew up in, to a table set for 14 people, to a night that was supposed to be a celebration and became instead the last night I ever sat at that table as the person they thought I was. My grandmother, Nora Calloway, had died 7 weeks earlier. She was 81 years old, sharp as a tack until the last 6 months, and the only person in my immediate family who had ever looked at me and seen what was actually there rather than what was convenient to see. She called me her quiet one. Not as a diminishment, but as a recognition. She said quiet was where the real power lived. Nora had left behind a modest estate, most of it distributed cleanly between my parents and a handful of cousins. But she had made one provision separately, privately, and very deliberately. She had left the Heron Parcel, the 4.2-acre piece of land she had purchased in 1987 for $11,000, land that sat in what was then an unremarkable part of the county, in joint ownership. 50% to the Calloway Family Trust. 50% to me. Not to Vivienne. Not split between the two of us equally. Specifically and solely to me. At the time, no one thought much of it. The land had been appraised at $218,000. It was raw land, partially wetland, with no infrastructure and no obvious development path. My father called it a sentimental gesture. My mother said Grandma Nora had always had a soft spot for me, which was her way of implying that the bequest was based on emotion rather than merit. What none of them knew was that I had been the one who drove Nora to her attorney's office 3 years before she died. I had been the one who sat in the waiting room reading legal briefs while she met with her estate lawyer. And when she came out, she had squeezed my hand and said, "I put in that clause you told me about, Bug. The right of first refusal. Just like you said." I was 26 years old, 1 year out of law school, working as a junior associate at a commercial real estate firm. I understood things about land and value and patience that my family had never needed to understand because they had always lived comfortably enough to mistake comfort for intelligence. The right of first refusal clause meant that if the family trust ever wanted to sell their 50% stake in the Heron Parcel, they had to offer it to me first at assessed value before going to any outside buyer. At the time, that assessed value was a little over $100,000 for their half. By the night of Nora's memorial dinner, 6 weeks after her death, it was still roughly the same. But that night, the value of the land was the last thing on anyone's mind. The dinner had been my mother Diane's production entirely. She had invited 14 people, relatives, close friends, the kind of crowd assembled less for grief and more for the optics of a family that handled loss with grace and good wine. The table was beautiful. The food was catered. Diane had hired someone to make a small photo display of Nora's life. I had contributed to that photo display. I had spent 2 weeks going through boxes in Nora's house, scanning photographs, organizing them chronologically. My mother had thanked me by text with a thumbs-up emoji. I arrived at the dinner with news I hadn't shared with anyone. I had been offered a position at Meridian Capital Group, one of the top commercial real estate development firms in the state. Not as an attorney. As a junior development associate, a rare crossover role that would let me use my legal background to structure deals. It was the job I had been engineering my career toward for 4 years. I was going to tell my family that night. I thought it might be nice to have something to celebrate at what was otherwise a sad occasion. I never got the chance. The dinner progressed the way family dinners in my household always did, with Vivienne at the center. My sister was 31 at the time, 3 years older than me, and she had a talent my mother deeply admired, the talent of appearing competent while doing very little. Vivienne had worked in my father's financial advisory firm for 4 years in a client relations role that consisted primarily of scheduling and looking presentable at events. My father, Gerald, had recently given her the title of associate director. It was, as far as I could tell, a title that corresponded to no actual change in responsibility. But that night, Gerald stood up to make an announcement. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about Nora. He talked about legacy. And then he said that in the spirit of honoring what Nora had built, he had made a decision about the family's investment portfolio. As many of you know, he said, swirling his wine with the confidence of a man who had never been questioned, we have a number of assets that will need to be managed and eventually grown over the coming years. After a great deal of thought, Diane and I have decided that Vivienne will be taking the lead on all family investment decisions going forward. She has the temperament, the relationships, and the vision to steward what we've built. The table applauded. Someone clinked a glass. I sat very still. For 3 years, I had been the one my father called when a contract needed reviewing. For 3 years, I had been the one who flagged the problem with the Riverside condo deed that would have cost them $60,000 in penalties. For 3 years, I had answered calls at 10 o'clock at night from my mother about whether a particular investment vehicle was being taxed correctly. I had done all of this without a title, without compensation, and without complaint, because I believed that competence was a currency that eventually got spent. I looked at my mother. She was beaming at Vivienne. She reached over and put her hand over my sister's hand, the exact same gesture she always used when she wanted a room to see how much she loved her. Then she looked at me, and she said, with genuine kindness in her voice, which somehow made it worse, Elena is still finding her footing, of course. We're not worried. Everyone moves at their own pace. Finding her footing. I was 28 years old. I had a law degree. I had just been offered a position at one of the top development firms in the state. And my mother was telling 14 people over catered salmon that I was still finding my footing. Someone at the table, a cousin I barely knew, nodded sympathetically and said, "It's hard for some people. Not everyone is cut out for business." I didn't cry. I didn't say a word. I ate my dinner and I smiled when it was appropriate and I helped clear the dessert plates and I drove home. And then I sat in my car in the parking garage of my apartment building for 45 minutes. I didn't make a scene. I didn't send a scathing text. I didn't call anyone to defend myself. The people who had watched me be quietly diminished over a dinner table weren't owed my anger. They weren't even owed an explanation. What I decided, sitting in that parking garage, was that I was going to disappear. Not literally. But from them. I was going to step back so completely and so finally that when the day came, and I believed, with a bone-deep certainty, that the day would come, they would feel the shape of me by my absence. I started at Meridian Capital Group the following Monday. I did not tell my family. 3 months later, when my mother called to ask if I could review a contract for the family trust, I said I was busy. When she called again a month after that about a deed issue, I said I was no longer in a position to help with family matters. When she asked why, I said I needed to focus on my own work. She said, "I hope you're not still sulking about the dinner, Elena." It wasn't a criticism. I said, "I'm not sulking, Mom. I'm just unavailable." And I hung up. Over the following 6 months, the calls became less frequent. Then they stopped. Vivienne tried once, a performatively casual text asking if I wanted to grab lunch. I read it and didn't respond. My father emailed twice about a legal question. I forwarded both emails to a colleague and asked him to respond professionally on behalf of a referral. 6 years of silence. Not because I was broken. Not because I was sulking, as my mother had theorized. But because I understood something my family had never grasped about me. I did not need them to see my value. I only needed them to eventually require it. And in those 6 years, I built something they would never have predicted. At Meridian, I moved fast. My legal background gave me an edge in structuring deals that other development associates couldn't match. Within 18 months, I was leading acquisition projects. Within 3 years, I was a senior development director. I was managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and I was being paid very well to do it. But the real work was happening quietly on the side. I had been watching the east corridor of the city for years, even before Nora died. I knew what the Heron Parcel sat adjacent to. I knew what the infrastructure plans looked like. I had access to municipal development records through my work at Meridian, and I watched as the city quietly rezoned parcels around the eastern edge, watched as a light rail extension was approved, watched as commercial developers started making inquiries about land they had previously ignored. In year 3 of my silence, I left Meridian. I took my savings, $140,000 accumulated with painful discipline, and I registered Voss Development Group. I took my maiden name, my mother's maiden name actually, the one detail of my identity they had never paid attention to. I leased a small office. I hired 2 people. I started acquiring land in the East Corridor, parcel by parcel, in the name of shell LLCs that traced back, if you looked hard enough, to Voss Development Group. By year 5, I had assembled 14 parcels surrounding the Heron Parcel from nearly every direction. The Heron Parcel sat in the center of what I was building like a keystone in an arch. Without it, my development, a mixed-use commercial complex I had already secured 2 anchor tenants for, would require a costly redesign and a 3-year delay. With it, the project was worth an estimated $62 million at completion. A developer named Hartwell Group had approached my family 6 months earlier with an offer of $8.7 million for the Heron Parcel. My family had been thrilled. They had called their attorneys. They had started planning what to do with the money. And then the attorneys had found the co-ownership clause in the deed. And then they had found my name. And then, after what I imagine was a series of increasingly frantic conversations, they had located my office. And walked in. Needing the one signature only I could give. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. I looked at my family across the conference table. 6 years. My mother had gotten a new haircut, something shorter and more sculpted than the waves she'd always worn. My father had aged more than I expected, the skin around his jaw loosening, the hair at his temples gone fully silver. Vivienne looked the same, careful and polished and slightly predatory in the way she always was when something she wanted was close but not yet in her hands. "How long have you been here?" my mother asked. Her voice was quiet. She was looking at the rendering on the wall, the East Corridor Master Plan, the name Voss Development Group printed at the bottom. "4 years," I said. She looked at the rendering for another long moment. "Elena," my father began, his voice carrying the tone he used when he needed to reframe a situation in his favor, "we should have been in touch sooner." "I know things ended." "Nothing ended, Dad," I said. "You made a decision." "I made a decision. That's all." "We need to talk about the Heron Parcel," Vivienne said. She had always been the most direct of the three of them when something she wanted was on the line. She leaned forward slightly. "You know about Hartwell's offer?" "I do," I said. "Then you know we're trying to move forward with the sale," she said. "We just need your signature to release the co-ownership." I looked at her. "I know," I said. The room went quiet. "So you'll sign?" my mother asked, a careful hopefulness in her voice that I recognized. It was the voice she used when she believed she already knew the answer and just needed me to confirm it. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the skyline for a moment. 6 years of quiet mornings and 18-hour days and dinners eaten alone over development plans were looking back at me from the glass. "I'm going to need you to come back on Friday," I said, turning around. "My attorney will be present. We have some things to discuss before anyone talks about signatures." "What things?" Vivienne asked, her voice sharpening. "The right of first refusal clause," I said. "Among others." I watched the phrase land. Watched my father's brow furrow. Watched Vivienne's eyes narrow. Watched my mother's hopeful expression begin, very slowly, to recalculate. "Friday at 2 o'clock, I said, and walked to the door. I held it open. "Priya will validate your parking." They filed out. My mother paused in the doorway and looked at me for a long moment, the way someone looks at a house they used to live in and can no longer recognize. "You did all of this," she said softly. It wasn't a question. It wasn't quite an apology. It was the first honest thing she had said to me in 6 years. "Yes," I said. She nodded once, slowly, and walked out. I closed the door. I stood alone in conference room B and looked out at the city I had been quietly reshaping for 4 years. The keystone in the arch. The signature they couldn't get anywhere else. Friday was 3 days away. I had been patient for 6 years. I could be patient for 3 more days. I spent Wednesday and Thursday the way I had spent most of the last 6 years. Working. My attorney, Kara Novak, came to the office Wednesday afternoon. Kara was 44 years old, a former real estate litigator who had pivoted to corporate transactional work after winning a case that made 3 developers cry in open court. She was precise, methodical, and almost frighteningly calm, qualities I had specifically selected her for. I needed someone who would not be moved by sentiment on Friday, because I already knew I would have to manage my own. We sat in my office with the door closed and the blinds angled against the afternoon light. Kara spread the documents across the conference table with the focused efficiency of a surgeon prepping instruments. "Walk me through the right of first refusal," I said, even though I knew it cold. I needed to hear it said aloud by someone else. "It's clean," Kara said, tapping the relevant clause in the original deed. Nora Calloway inserted it with counsel in 2016. It's been recorded with the county since her death. The language is unambiguous. If the Calloway Family Trust seeks to sell or transfer their 50% interest in the Heron Parcel, they must first offer that interest to you at the most recently assessed fair market value. The offer must be held open for 30 days. And the current assessed value of their half? $1,140,000, Kara said. Per the county assessment completed this past April. I let that number sit in the air for a moment. $1,140,000. Half of what the Hartwell Group was offering for the entire parcel was $4,350,000. The difference between what my family expected to walk away with and what I could legally force them to accept was $3,210,000. I watched Kara make a small note on her legal pad. "There's something else," she said. I looked up. "I pulled the title activity on the parcel for the last 18 months. Your family's attorney filed a preliminary sale agreement with the county recorder's office in August." She turned a document to face me. Hartwell Group paid an earnest money deposit of $87,000 directly into the Callaway Trust account. The preliminary agreement represents both ownership interests as available and unencumbered. I read the document carefully. They represented my interest as available. "They did," Kara said. "Which means they either didn't know about the co-ownership clause, or they knew and hoped you'd never surface to enforce it." I looked at the date on the filing. August. 4 months ago. Vivienne had been negotiating a sale of a property she co-owned with me without telling me, without contacting me, and without disclosing my interest to the buyer. "Hartwell could sue," I said. "Hartwell almost certainly will sue," Kara replied, "once they understand the full picture. They paid $87,000 toward a deal that cannot legally close without a signature the sellers cannot legally provide. The preliminary agreement is materially misleading." I sat back in my chair. I thought about Vivienne at the memorial dinner, smiling while my father announced she had the temperament and the vision to manage the family's investments. I thought about my mother's hand over hers, the soft pride in her expression. Vivienne had not managed the investment. She had tried to sell it without understanding what she owned, and in doing so, she had walked the family directly into the path of a lawsuit from an 8-figure development group. "They have no idea," I said. "None," Kara confirmed. "Their attorney missed the co-ownership clause entirely in due diligence. Hartwell's attorney apparently did too, until the title company flagged your name during the commitment process last month. That's almost certainly what sent your family here." I thought about my mother's voice in the conference room doorway. "You did all of this?" The soft, slow recalibration in her eyes. She hadn't come because she missed me. She hadn't come because 6 years of silence had finally broken something open in her chest. She had come because Hartwell's title company had found my name on a deed and the deal she believed would solve everything had stopped moving. It should have hurt more than it did. But somewhere in the last 6 years, I had grieved that particular expectation so thoroughly that what I felt now was not pain. It was clarity. "One more thing," I said to Kara. I turned my monitor to face her. "I want you to look at this." I had spent Tuesday evening pulling everything I could find about the Callaway Trust's activity since Nora's death. Public records. County filings. Corporate registrations associated with my father's financial advisory business. What I had assembled was not a crime scene. But it was a portrait of 6 years of mismanagement so dense and so thoroughly ignored that it told its own story. Vivienne's role as investment director had produced no documented gains. 3 minor real estate assets that had been part of the original estate portfolio had been sold at below market value, the kind of below market sales that happened when someone was in a hurry or didn't know how to negotiate. The proceeds had cycled back into the trust and largely sat in a low-yield account. The one substantial asset remaining, the one with real potential, the one my grandmother had set aside specifically for me, had been nearly given away to a developer for $8.7 million. Which, if you understood what I had quietly built around it, was roughly 14% of what it could actually be worth in 18 months. Kara studied my screen for a long time without speaking. "She's been managing this for 6 years, she finally said. "Yes," I said. Kara looked at me over the rim of her reading glasses. "You're not going to sign the Hartwell deal, are you?" "No," I said. "What are you going to offer them?" I pulled up the Voss Development Group master plan on the secondary monitor. 14 parcels arranged in a ring around the Heron Parcel. 2 confirmed anchor tenants. Permits in process. The East Corridor Light Rail Extension, now 18 months from completion, running directly through what would be the main entrance of the complex. "I'm going to exercise my right of first refusal," I said. "I'll buy their 50% at assessed value." Kara was quiet for a moment. 1.1 million instead of 4.3. "Yes." "They'll refuse." "They can't," I said. "The clause is enforceable. If they reject the assessed value offer, the sale to any third party is legally blocked until the 30-day window closes. And if they try to force the Hartwell deal through anyway, they're in breach. Hartwell's attorneys will be the ones explaining to a judge why they signed a preliminary agreement on a co-owned property without disclosing the co-owner." Kara removed her glasses and folded them carefully. She had the look of someone who appreciated a well-constructed outcome. "What do you want from Friday?" she asked. "I thought about this for a long time. I want the truth in the room," I said. "I want my father to understand what my sister has been doing with the family's money. I want my mother to understand what I've been doing with mine. And then I want the conversation that 6 years of silence was always building toward." Kara nodded slowly. "And if they refuse the buyout? If they dig in? Then the 30-day clock starts on Friday," I said. "And they spend that month watching Hartwell's attorneys file a misrepresentation claim against the trust. Which will freeze the Hartwell deal, freeze the asset, and cost them more in legal fees than the difference between what I'm offering and what they expected." Kara smiled for the first time that afternoon. It was a small, admiring smile. "You've been patient," she said. "I had good training," I replied. "My grandmother was very good at waiting for the right moment." Friday arrived cold and bright, the kind of October morning that felt like an announcement. I was at my desk by 7. I reviewed every document one final time, not because I needed to, but because precision was how I managed the part of me that was still, despite everything, the daughter sitting at that dinner table waiting to be seen. My family arrived at 1:58. I watched them cross the lobby on the monitor feed from my office. My father was wearing a suit I recognized, dark charcoal, the one he wore to meetings he considered important. My mother had dressed carefully, a deep blue wrap dress that I associated with occasions where she wanted to appear both authoritative and reasonable. Vivienne was in black. She had brought her own attorney, a man I didn't recognize, young, carrying a leather portfolio with the anxious energy of someone who suspected he had missed something but hadn't yet found what. They were shown to conference room A this time. Larger. The full east corridor rendering was visible on the wall directly across from the door. I had not arranged this. It had simply always been there. I let them wait 8 minutes. When I walked in with Kara beside me, the atmosphere in the room had already shifted from what I imagined it had been when they arrived. Vivienne's attorney had clearly been reviewing something on his phone with an expression that was moving steadily from professional to troubled. My father was studying the rendering on the wall. My mother was very still. "Thank you for coming back," I said, setting my folder on the table. Vivienne got there first. "Elena, before we start, I want to say that we should have reached out years ago. The way things were left, Kara," I said, without looking at Vivienne. Kara opened her folder and slid a single document across the table to Vivienne's attorney. He picked it up. "Read the first paragraph." His face did something complicated. "This is a notice of intent to exercise right of first refusal," Kara said, her voice carrying the calm efficiency of someone reading a weather report. "Under the terms of the original Heron Parcel deed, recorded with the county following the death of Nora Calloway, Elena Voss, formerly Elena Calloway, holds the right to purchase the Calloway Family Trust's 50% interest in the property at assessed fair market value before any sale to a third party can be completed." The room went very quiet. Vivienne's attorney looked up. "The assessed value is $1,140,000, Kara said. Per the April County assessment. We have a certified check prepared." The silence that followed was the specific kind that happens when a room full of people recalculates simultaneously. "That's not," Vivienne started. The Hartwell offer is not relevant to this transaction," Kara said. "The right of first refusal predates any third-party offer. It is a recorded instrument. Your client's obligation is to honor it. Vivienne turned to her attorney with a look that expected rescue. He was still reading. My father had not spoken. He was looking at the document Kara had passed across the table, the recorded deed clause, the language my grandmother had signed at 80 years old in an attorney's office while I sat in the waiting room reading real estate briefs. I need a moment with my client, Vivienne's attorney said. Of course, Kara said pleasantly. Vivienne stood up. She looked at me for the first time with something other than strategic calculation. It was brief, but it was real, a flash of something that looked almost like recognition. She walked to the corner of the room with her attorney and they began to speak in low, urgent voices. My mother looked across the table at me. Vivienne signed a preliminary agreement with Hartwell, she said. Her voice was careful. She was not making an accusation. She was asking me to tell her what she already half knew. She did, I said. Without consulting you. Without disclosing I existed, I said. My mother closed her eyes briefly. Gerald, she said, her voice dropping. My father looked up from the document. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. 30 years of marriage compressed into a single look. The look said, this is what I was afraid of. The look said, this is what 6 years of Vivienne's stewardship had quietly become. My father set the document down with a deliberateness that felt like a man trying to hold himself together with both hands. How long have you been building out there? He asked. His voice was different from anything I'd heard from him in the conference room 2 days ago. The authority was gone. What was left sounded almost like the voice he'd had when I was 12 and had come to him with a question he didn't know the answer to. I turned my monitor so they could see the Voss Development Master Plan. The 14 parcels. The anchor tenant agreements. The light rail notation. 4 years of active development, I said. 2 years of land acquisition before that. My father stared at the screen. I watched him locate the Heron Parcel at the center of it all. Watched him understand what it was, not a sentimental piece of land Nora had left to the quiet one, but the keystone, the physical center of a $62 million project that his other daughter had nearly destroyed by selling it to a developer for 14 cents on the dollar. She told us the Hartwell offer was fair market, he said. His voice was very quiet. It wasn't, I said. Vivienne came back to the table. Her attorney sat down looking as though he had aged several years during the huddle. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the master plan for a long time. Something crossed her face that I had not expected and didn't entirely know what to do with, not anger, not calculation, but a genuine and unguarded reckoning. You built all of that, she said. Yes, I said. While we were trying to sell the middle of it. Yes. The room was completely silent. It was Vivienne's attorney who finally spoke. My client would like to request a 60-day extension to evaluate. The right of first refusal window is 30 days from today, Kara said. That's statutory. It isn't negotiable. We'd like to discuss a different arrangement, Vivienne said. Her voice had lost its edge. She was looking at me now, not the way she used to, the older sister performing authority she hadn't earned, but carefully, like someone who has just stepped onto ice and is testing it with each word. A partnership. Something structured. Elena, you clearly have the development infrastructure. If we contributed the parcel, your parcel, I said. Not mine. She paused. If we contributed our interest in the parcel, there could be a revenue arrangement from the completed development. We can negotiate terms that, Vivienne, I said. She stopped. I looked at her. Then at my mother. Then at my father. The three of them, 6 years older, sitting on the other side of a table in a building I had built, in a city I had quietly reshaped, needing the one thing they had never once thought I would have the patience to accumulate. You told a room full of people I was still finding my footing, I said. My voice was steady. Quieter than I expected. You let me review your contracts, manage your disputes, and flag your mistakes for 3 years, And then you announced at your mother's memorial dinner that Vivienne had the vision. That I was still becoming something. My mother's eyes were bright. She didn't look away. I didn't go silent, I said. I went to work. The sentence landed and stayed. My father looked down at his hands. My mother pressed her lips together. Vivienne looked at the East Corridor master plan on my monitor, at the 14 parcels arranged around the center of everything, and she didn't speak. Kara slid the certified check across the table. $1,140,000. Clean, legal, and final. You have 30 days to honor the right of first refusal, I said. If you reject this offer, the Hartwell deal cannot proceed without my signature. If Hartwell sues for misrepresentation on the preliminary agreement, that is a matter between them and the trust. Kara's firm is not involved in that litigation. I stood up. I want you to understand something, I said. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm not doing this out of bitterness or because of a dinner that happened 6 years ago. I'm doing this because this is what I built. And no one, not Hartwell, not the trust, not anyone in this room, is going to sell the center of it for less than it's worth because no one thought to tell me it was happening. I picked up my folder. I hope you accept the offer, I said. $1.14 million is a clean exit. If you'd like to discuss terms before the 30 days are up, call Kara. I walked to the door. Elena. My father's voice stopped me. I turned back. He was looking at me the way he had looked at the rendering earlier, the way a man looks at something he recognizes but cannot quite name because he has never seen it from this angle before. I owe you an apology that's long overdue. I looked at him for a moment. You do, I said. And I'll hear it. But not today. I walked out of conference room A and back down the hall to my office. I closed the door. I sat at my desk. Outside, through the floor-to-ceiling glass, the East Corridor spread out below me, the 14 parcels, the rail extension under construction 3 blocks south, the skyline pressing forward the way cities do when someone has quietly convinced them it's safe to grow. I had been patient for 6 years. The 30-day clock had started. And for the first time since my grandmother had squeezed my hand outside an attorney's office and said, I put in that clause, bug, just like you said, I let myself believe that what came next was going to be exactly what I had been building toward. They accepted the offer on day 26. Kara called me at 8:15 on a Thursday morning, 4 days before the window closed. Her voice carried the particular satisfaction of someone who had watched a precisely constructed argument do exactly what it was designed to do. The trust signed the transfer, she said. $1,140,000. Clean conveyance. No contingencies. The Heron Parcel is yours outright. I was standing at my kitchen counter with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched yet. I looked out the window at the city still waking up, the early light catching the steel frame of the East Corridor construction 3 miles away. Thank you, Kara, I said. After I hung up, I stood there for a while. I had expected to feel something enormous, a release, a collapse, the emotional equivalent of setting down a weight I had been carrying for 6 years. What I felt instead was quieter than that. It was closer to the feeling of turning the last page of a book you have been reading for a very long time. Not emptiness. Completion. The Hartwell situation resolved itself in the way these things tend to when everyone involved has access to good attorneys. Hartwell's legal team sent a demand letter to the Callaway Trust within 10 days of our Friday meeting, claiming misrepresentation in the preliminary agreement and seeking return of the $87,000 deposit plus legal fees. Vivienne's attorney negotiated. The trust returned the deposit in full. There was no lawsuit, but only barely, and only because Hartwell had their own reasons for not wanting the details of their due diligence failure in a public filing. Vivienne's role as investment director of the Callaway Family Trust was quietly dissolved. There was nothing left to direct. The trust's remaining assets, depleted by 6 years of below-market sales and carrying costs on a parcel they couldn't move, amounted to less than the legal fees they had just absorbed. My father's financial advisory business, still technically operating, had lost 3 of its 4 remaining clients in the 18 months prior, a detail I learned later, from my father himself. They were not destitute. But the image of prosperity my mother had maintained through every dinner party and charity luncheon for the last 2 decades had become exactly that. An image. It was my father who called, 6 weeks after the transfer. He asked if he could take me to lunch. Not at a restaurant designed to impress. He named a small Italian place near my office that he had looked up, he said, because he heard it was good. Simple and unpretentious. I said yes. We sat across from each other at a corner table, and for the first few minutes we talked about small things, the weather, a road closure near my building, the particular difficulty of parking downtown on Fridays. My father was not a man who had ever been comfortable with silence or with vulnerability, and I watched him working his way towards something the way a person works their way to the edge of a cold pool. He set his fork down. I'd been rehearsing this for weeks, he said. I had a whole version of it in my head, something organized. But I think anything organized is going to sound like I'm still managing the situation, and I've managed enough things badly for one lifetime. I looked at him. He was looking at his plate. What you showed us in that conference room, he said. The 14 parcels. The tenants. The plan. He shook his head slowly. I have spent 30 years in finance, Elena. I know what that represents. I know how long that takes. I know what it costs, not just money, the kind of discipline it takes. The solitude. Dad, I said. I need to say it, he said. Please. I nodded. I knew you were talented. I knew it from the time you were 12 years old and you were arguing case logic better than my junior associates. I knew it, and I buried it, because acknowledging it fully would have meant acknowledging that Kevin was wrong and Vivienne was wrong, and I chose the easier conclusion. I chose the story that let me feel like I hadn't failed as a father. He looked up at me. The truth is I failed both my daughters. I failed Vivienne by letting her believe she had earned something she hadn't. And I failed you by treating your competence like an inconvenience. The restaurant moved quietly around us, other conversations, the soft clink of dishes. I know it's late, he said. I know an apology at this point is something you've already had to live past. But I am proud of you, Elena. Not in the way a parent says that to be kind. I am professionally, genuinely, completely in awe of what you built, and I am sorry it took losing everything else to finally make me say it to your face. I had imagined this conversation many times over 6 years. In some versions, I said something devastating. In others I said nothing at all. In the version I had carried longest, I cried, because the grief of wanting your father's acknowledgement and not receiving it for decades lives very close to the surface, no matter how many floors above him you eventually build your office. I didn't cry. I didn't deliver the devastating line. I just said, thank you, Dad. That matters more than you know. We finished lunch. He paid the check without making a production of it. We stood on the sidewalk outside and he hugged me, briefly and awkwardly, the way fathers do when they have only recently remembered how. I let him. It wasn't reconciliation. Not fully. That is a longer road than one lunch can cover. And I was not going to compress 6 years of honest reckoning into an afternoon because the apology had finally arrived. But it was a beginning. And it was real. And it was his. I drove back to the office and sat at my desk for a long time thinking about Nora. There was something I had not told my family. Something I had done quietly, 3 months after accepting the Hartwell situation, before any of the dust had settled. Nora had a caretaker in her last 2 years. A woman named Martha Reyes, who had come 3 days a week to help with meals and medications and the particular loneliness of a woman who was still sharp but increasingly frail. Martha had been kind to Nora in a way that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with genuine decency. She used to call Nora's grandchildren by name and ask after them with real interest, even the grandchildren who never came to visit. I had tracked Martha down through Nora's old address book, which I had kept after the memorial. Martha was 63, living in a rental apartment she had occupied for 12 years, working 2 part-time caregiving jobs to cover a fixed income that did not quite cover fixed expenses. She had no idea I was coming. She opened the door to her apartment and looked at me with pleasant wariness, and I told her my name and she said, immediately and without hesitation, "Oh, you're Nora's quiet one." I had to stand in her doorway for a moment before I could speak. I set up a monthly transfer into Martha's account. Enough to close the gap between what she earned and what she needed. I did not make a ceremony of it. I told her it was something I wanted to do in Nora's memory, and Martha said, "Your grandmother talked about you all the time, you know. She said you were the one who understood the long game." I thought about that on the drive back to the office. The long game. Nora had said it to me once, years before she died. We were sitting on her porch and I was frustrated about something at work, some credit I hadn't received, some acknowledgement that had been given to someone else. And she had said, "Bug, anyone can win the short game. It just takes nerve. The long game takes something else entirely. It takes the willingness to be invisible right up until the moment you're not." She was right. She had always been right. The Voss Development East Corridor project broke ground the following March. I was standing at the edge of the Heron Parcel, in steel-toed boots with dirt on my jacket, when Mike from the construction crew handed me a hard hat with Voss Development printed on the side. I put it on and looked out over the 4.2 acres that my grandmother had purchased for $11,000 in 1987, land that everyone else had looked at and seen nothing, land that I had looked at and seen the center of everything. Priya took a photo. I didn't post it. I just kept it, the way I had kept the photo of the pink cupcake in Sadie's story, the way you keep evidence of the distance you have traveled. It has been 14 months since that groundbreaking. The East Corridor complex is 60% complete. The anchor tenants are building out their spaces. The light rail extension opened 2 months ago, and the foot traffic projections we submitted to the city have already been exceeded by 31%. At current trajectory, the completed project will be worth somewhere between $68 and $74 million. I tell you the number not to impress you. I tell you the number because for a long time, people told me I didn't understand money. That I was still finding my footing. That some people just weren't cut out for business. Those people deserve specifics. My relationship with my family is what it is. My father and I have lunch once a month. It is sometimes comfortable and sometimes careful, and I have stopped needing it to be one thing in particular. My mother and I speak occasionally, the kind of conversations that are still finding their shape, both of us navigating the distance between who we were at that dinner table and who we are now. Vivienne and I have not spoken since the conference room. I do not know if we will. There is a grief in that I have decided not to pretend is not there. She was my sister before she was my antagonist, and both things are true, and both things live in the same place. What I know is this. My grandmother was right about the long game. But she was also right about something else she told me once, something simpler. She said the only person you owe a full accounting of your worth to is yourself. Not your family, not a conference room, not a dinner table. Just yourself, in the quiet. I had given that accounting every day for 6 years. In early mornings and late nights and meals eaten alone over development plans and the particular loneliness of building something no one around you can yet see. I was not invisible during those 6 years. I was precise. And when the moment came, when they walked through my glass doors needing the one thing only I could give, I did not scream. I did not perform. I did not make them pay for every slight, every dinner, every maybe next year. I simply opened the folder. And let the truth speak in the language they had always understood. The language of what something is actually worth. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.